they're said to be universal. Through any society that you go to, you will see these type of archetypes, whether it be the wise old man, the great mother, the maiden, the blessing of a child, darkness and light, and of course God. But there is a rarest of all archetypes with the exception of God, and that is the hero. Our Uncle Jack was a hero. He's a hero among men. He changed so many people's lives, and by my estimations, my calculations, I could show you the math later, but he impacted over 300,000 people's lives through his parishes, through our family, through the people that you interact with on a daily basis. So, Uncle Jack conservatively reached 300,000 people, and the amount of mentorship that he gave on a daily basis, whether it be to serve other people's families or do marriage counseling, and the people in his church and us individually, as Scott just said, like he would have the deepest and most intellectually conversations with them. So today I'd like to talk about a little bit about his childhood, some of the teaching, his coaching time period, and his further education. We'll touch a little bit about his priesthood, but we've already heard a lot about that. And some of his many accomplishments, which Scott articulated so well. So one of the most impressive things about Uncle Jack in his childhood is he knew from 6 years old that he was going to be a priest. Was he at 5 or 6? I can't remember the exact time. He's 6, okay. So who here knew at 6 years old what they wanted to do? I mean, we got people in all, in professionals, we got people in school here. No, I didn't know. There's no way. So that's pretty amazing. It just set him apart from birth, I would say. And one of the neat things that he would always tell me about is how he would whistle on his way home from school before he joined the seminary. And Grandma loved that. She would know when her son is on his way home because he was whistling. And when he left for the seminary, she missed that. And they only got to see him for once a month, but there were shenanigans abounding in the seminary, and I wish I would have been able a chance to talk to. I bet it was awesome. But so when he was in the seminary, they had to be absolutely silent at night, and every day they had inspections by these supervisors, and these supervisors were people that were in the second or third year of the seminary, and he was the first year. So this one particular supervisor kept on giving him these gigs. And with these gigs, they get demerits. So if you had 25 demerits, you get a five demerit. You had to go see the archbishop. So instead of going to see the archbishop, him and his buddies put these metal hangers underneath his bed at night when the supervisor was on night watch. And so there needs to be complete silence when it's at night at the seminary. Reverence of God. You're all just sitting there meditating and praying to go to sleep. So when the supervisor came back and had to pull it back, Uncle Jack and his buddies just burst up laughing. Of course, he had to talk to the bishop. So after seminary, he actually taught some classes, which we heard about, and I didn't realize it was for 5 years. But if any of you have ever spoke to Uncle Jack, you know he was an amazing teacher. And I hope he knows that to this day, that some of the best teachings I've ever had was on some of the runs that we went with Ken. We would go on runs to Indianapolis, Illinois, everywhere, and Uncle Jack had taught me the history of the church, pretty much. So he was an incredible educator. And he also coached football. And to my knowledge, he still has the record for the most victories of 25 straight victories. And he had this intensity, again, with the silence. The players in his team were not allowed to speak on the bus. So you could even hear the sound of a whisper. And once you got to the game, you cheered and you shook the bus and they went and attacked the enemy. And they had this razzle-dazzle type of play, years ahead of his time, stuff you see like Oregon Ducks and Texas A&M and things like that playing. Uncle Jack started that style. And they had these funny chants. They would say, rah, rah, ree, kick him in the knee. Rah, rah, ras, kick him in the other knee. Didn't know where that was going, did you?
Some of us did.
Yeah. So we heard that he had 3 parishes, and at those 3 parishes, he was responsible for, there's a long distance apart. And Grandpa was down there to see him one time, and so they're driving to their next parish, and Grandpa says, well, how far is it? Oh, and Uncle Jack goes, that's down the road a piece. 25 miles later, Grandpa goes, I thought you said down the road a piece. And he's like, that's how it is around here. So I actually interviewed Uncle Jack in anticipation of this event, and I want to share some stories that he probably many people hadn't heard. So there's 2 stories that I've really appreciated, and since he's in school, he shared them with me. Or since I'm in school now, he shared them with me. And one of the times he had to take an anatomy and physiology course. And in this anatomy and physiology course, there's mainly nursing majors. And nursing majors are female. So the very first day of class, the teacher goes, All right, so I want you to look at the person next to you, examine them, and then make sure that you look at their body and take it all. And he goes, gladly. And she's like, Mr. Holmes. He was also in a philosophy class, and they were talking about the philosophy of life and the things of wilderness around us. So he chose to do a presentation on water. And he was way technically advanced ahead of his time, so he made a video with this beautiful classical music playing behind it with just images. You would see an image of someone washing their hands, a couple holding hands walking in the rain, a river flowing between the rocks, Niagara Falls, and this beautiful music's playing. And then you see a toilet. It all goes down the toilet. And, of course, the professor, Mr. Holmes. And one of my favorite things, I think the things that sets Uncle Jack apart the most to me is his vernacular. The way he would speak was just extraordinary, and it speaks of a time different than us. He would say, if he would ever say to you, boy, I'll tell you, you're about to hear something spectacular that you're super impressed about. But just, boy, I'll tell you something, so-and-so. I was like, wow, that is pretty impressive, Uncle Jack. And then, you can get into discussion with Uncle Jack, and he's like, I disagree. And then turns out Uncle Jack was right, and I was. Like, you were right, Uncle Jack, you were right. Way more times than you were wrong. Then he things said, like, leaded or unleaded, and of course he's referring to caffeinated or uncaffeinated. And then there's the ranking system, the Optimus Prime, and there's several Optimus Prime people here right now for his nephews. And of course, all great people were, according to Uncle Jack, all great people were born in July. I would happen to agree with that.
Scott, what is it?
Yep.
Jack and John's over there.
Oh, see, it's quite obvious, right? And then, of course, the best jokes that are the worst jokes in the world were the Uncle Jack jokes. And my favorite that I would like to share just real quick was the one where he went to the Grand Canyon. This part of the story is true. So he went to the Grand Canyon and fell on his knees aghast at the beauty and the glory and the majesty, and thanked God for what he saw, because it's an amazing display. While he was down there, he heard of this Indian who could remember everything. So he asked the Indian, he went to go see the Indian, he's like, so what'd you have for breakfast in 1961, July 1st? He goes, eggs. Jack walks by, that's not very impressive, whatever. Anybody could say that. And so he goes back 10 years later, he's like, I want to see the Grand Canyon again, and while I'm down there, I'll go see this Indian, because, I've been educated and cultured, and I know that when Indians, greet each other, they go, how, right? So he goes, sees the Grand Canyon, and then he sees the Indian, and he goes, how? And the Indian goes, scrambled. That was probably the best of it. I mean, he would sing, look for the golden arches whenever we're driving around in our little truck trips, and he hated onions. He hated onions so bad that it infiltrated into meat. Like, I was eating my sandwich, he's like, oh, there's onions on it. I'm like, yeah, there is. To this day, I still don't like onions. And so, a couple of years ago, everybody knows he was in a skilled nursing facility. And at the skilled nursing facility, this is his apartment. So his apartment, he had one of those monitors in case he falls. And anybody remember the little commercials, I've fallen and I can't get up. Well, he fell and he couldn't get up. And he was determined when he did look, like, hey, how can I help you? And he's like, well, I'm on the ground, and I can't seem to get myself off of the ground. Because he was determined not to say, I'm falling and I can't get up.
I didn't even know that one.
But that was his goal for that one. And of course, so let me find where I'm at. Okay. So as Scott mentioned, there's several things. He was a priest, a pilot, a coach. I actually forgot about that. He was a sheriff. He was an educator. I would even say he's a historian.
I forgot the pilot.
Yeah. So I would say he's a historian, because he taught me the history of the church, and history is preserved through the church. That's one of the great things about being around the Catholic Church, is there's so much history that's been preserved thanks to their holding on to the documents and things like that. So he was a champion racquetball player, a truck driver, an ice skater. When he first told me that, I was like, Uncle Jack, you're an ice skater? He's like, yes, it's how you appreciate the beauty and the majesty of the world. I'm like, okay.
Did you forget about the Olympics when he was in the Olympics?
So he's a manager for that multi-million-dollar company in New York, and that is actually where he broke his back. Uncle Jack broke his back with a garage door, or a garage collection door. Came out and slammed. He worked the rest of the day. He's like, my back still hurts. Gets checked by a doctor, and his back was broken. Tough guy. He was a collector of trains, some pretty rare and exotic trains. And of course, how could we talk about Uncle Jack without mentioning the camping trips? We were out on Lake Erie, and we went 25 minutes out, 30 miles an hour, knocked off the back of our engine on a sandbar. And then we had to take, thankfully Uncle Tom was smart enough to make us have a 10 horsepower engine. Took us 4.5 hours to get back. So
At least they got that.
yeah, exactly. We wouldn't have otherwise. And we ran out of gas. It was terrible. So Uncle Jack's camping trips were awful, but they were wonderful. So we heard about Uncle Jack's health. He had these 5 heart attacks, a triple bypass, hip replacement that he ended up getting MRSA with, was a skin infecting disease. Stents put in his heart. And each time I would have a conversation with Uncle Jack, and he would tell me before this was happening, he was having his heart attack, feeling the pain in his arm and all that. He would say, yeah, I had a conversation with God, said, Lord, if this is my time, I'm ready. We had that conversation 6 times. That speaks to his toughness, his dedication to God, and his readiness. So that's comforting for me to know that he was ready. Every time he was ready, and he just kept coming back. So though I stand before you today sad, I want you to know that I'm just glad and happy that he's not in pain anymore. Yeah. And you got to hear those precious words, well done, good and faithful servant. Though the world's a little less awesome than it was a week ago, earth's loss is heaven's gain. Mm-hmm. So I encourage you to reflect on Uncle Jack whenever you think about how he impacted your life, the time you got to spend with him, and just the many millions of people, or thousands of people, that he impacted. Reflect on his memory and help encourage you in your daily life. So while we're gathered in remorse, let's rejoice that he's home and that he's no longer in pain.